September of 2025. In the Atlantic Ocean, Operation Iron Reprisal is already underway. The 31 countries that make up NATO have launched a full-scale assault on the United States in an attempt to breach the most heavily fortified nation in the world. When NATO withdrew its bases from Europe, the attack started with a crack rather than a single shot. The United States withdraws from NATO and ceases to share systems, such as satellite data feeds. GPS NATO moves fast. Its objective is disruption rather than occupation. They will need to cross 3,000 miles of water without American airlift or logistics satellites in order to overthrow U.S. command, disarm important troops, and bring the U.S. to the negotiating table before things get out of control. The largest strike in modern history is the coalition strike. The catch is that they are now using the same playbook against one another, even though they know each other and have trained together for decades. NATO is a defensive ally, to be sure, but this is a sandbox, and that boundary has already been crossed. I wanted to see what would happen, even though I know it's unlikely. Let's review it. The objective is straightforward on paper. Persuade the U.S. to surrender without causing a large number of civilian casualties. No nuclear weapons. There will only be surgical strikes and speed pressure, no leveling towns. A 96-hour notice regarding escape plans is sent by NATO. As I previously stated, NATO is operating without the United States' assistance. As I mentioned earlier, they do not have GPS, at least not the American type. Instead, they use Europe's Galileo system, which is slower, more susceptible to jamming, and has never been used in combat. It's not that they lack anything, rather what they do have is insufficient to make up for what they recently lost. A lot of NATO's best equipment, such as F-35 fighters, Blackhawks, and HIMARS, still relies on U.S. parts, software updates, and extensive maintenance that is impossible to perform in the field, and they lack U.S. satellite intelligence, live drone feeds, and a global logistics network. Although the American Intel Web, which integrates satellites, sensors, and radar into a single image, is no longer available, NATO's F-35s can still exchange data with one another. Every flight is difficult for the fleet because spare parts aren't arriving. However, they continue because they don't want to miss the window closing if they don't. Greenland is where the stage begins. Fuel, ammunition, armor, and supplies are loaded onto cargo ships, and troops are sent to distant airstrips by Iceland, the Azores, and Canada. Across the Atlantic, supply convoys are closely spaced and heavily guarded. 3 well-coordinated thrusts comprise the invasion. The main landing force attacks the largest military base in the world, Station Norfolk on the Virginia coast. To attack Eglin Air Force Base and breach the U.S. coastal defenses, a second force travels to the Florida Panhandle. In a third push, European troops stationed as part of joint training programs move south from Canada into Maine and Michigan. The Atlantic is filled with convoys. Wave after wave of cargo ships are followed by leased tankers, NATO destroyers, and amphibious assault ships. Without U.S. ISR intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance, they are operating with less accuracy. Missile strikes are less accurate, reaction times are slower, and coordination becomes jumbled. They use Galileo for navigation and a patchwork of national satellites for intelligence. This won't work at all if it doesn't work fast. American air bases from Virginia to Georgia were struck by cruise missiles before dawn. NATO paratroopers are led onto major roads by the French Rafales and the RAF Typhoons. They accomplish this by trailing a wave of missiles, giving them 30 minutes to cause mayhem before U.S. jets regain control. The fleet moves swiftly and low to take the port, crater the docks, and clear a path for additional armor to follow. Special forces attack a U.S. missile base in North Dakota. Helicopters strike beachheads near Norfolk. The U.S. reacts immediately, but it's a risky move. Patriot missile batteries stop the initial sets of missiles. Threats are eliminated by Aegis ships. In a matter of hours, F-22 Raptors will be soaring over Virginia. The 100th departs Fort Campbell, while the 82nd Airborne blocks off key roads. Mobile anti-ship weapons are positioned along the coast by Kentucky Marines from Camp Lejeune. An opportunity for a shot from a U.S. submarine in the Atlantic is created when a French ship falls behind. Many people never visit the beach. People are already dying in the center of the nation as NATO strikes the coast. The US HIMARS uses GPS to guide rockets into landing zones. Cars that have stopped are picked up by Apache helicopters. Coastal batteries fire naval strike rockets, long-range, highly accurate guns that struck NATO patrol ships. Amphibian vehicles are hit directly. The armor sinks before the troops even begin to roll when they hit the water. B-1 bombers from Dyess Air Force Base in Texas, which is well outside NATO's strike zone, launch long-range anti-ship missiles at the convoy. Already, the American armor is moving. Bradley trucks and Abrams tanks for combat. Georgia is supplying all of the Paladin artillery. The United States utilizes its own infrastructure to its fullest. Within a day, heavy armor is outpacing NATO drones in speed. Interior lines facilitate faster movement, closer combat, and easier resupply for the troops. We can now understand why NATO lacks that. The war on computers begins. NATO strikes hard. Infrastructure on the East Coast gives way. Falsified GPS readings cause commercial drones to veer off course. Parts of New York and Virginia lose power. Numerous phony 911 calls and issues with train networks. The U.S. has already experienced this exact scenario, but banks act swiftly to stop fear from spreading. Cyber Command swiftly disables compromised networks and uses backup satellite lines to restore data. The military moves to more robust phone lines and underground cables known as dark fiber that are difficult to jam or hack. The underwater cables connecting Europe begin to break as the United States retaliates. Galileo satellite signals weaken near the fighting. The drones of NATO spy satellites will no longer provide updates to European command centers. Not communicating with the forward units. Targeting data abruptly loses its utility. The precise locations where NATO troops conceal fuel supplies are being targeted by U.S. cruise missiles. NATO gains nothing from the hacking war, and artillery is knocked out while reloading groups stall in rough ground. It causes them to disintegrate more quickly, but now that the ground is against NATO, speed isn't the only factor working against them. Virginia's coastline is marshy, flat, and full of choke points where supply convoys are backed up, and armor cannot move. The Appalachians form a wall to the west, making any push from the interior follow foreseeable routes. In the Midwest, columns that are visible to the public are easy for U.S. aircraft and drones to locate. Although America's road and train system is fully functional, rivers have destroyed bridges, flooded experts, and cratered roads. States like Colorado and Arizona are already sending units east across an uninterrupted national network. And it takes less than 72 hours to transport troops, food, fuel, and ammunition from coast to coast. Conversely, NATO relies on a small number of vulnerable ports and convoys. By day 4, every delay adds up and every ship they lose hurts more. Every night, multiple cargo ships are sunk by U.S. submarines, and the psychological toll is severe. When convoys of tankers are abandoned at sea, supplies are dispersed and the flow of goods slows to a trickle. NATO has failed to secure a deep water port, but they do have some land near the Canadian border, parts of Norfolk, and a few airfields in Florida. It's just bits of a plan falling apart in real time. Without that, there's no way to send armor, fuel, or resupply. Numerous National Guard brigades and groups are dispatched by the U.S. into the interior. More armor units and air bases will soon be added to Tennessee and Ohio. NATO will run out of supplies and the defenders will outnumber the invaders. Their F-35s are running low on missiles, and their tanks need fuel, but they are unable to obtain more. The beach remains a bottleneck, and the U.S. is not only holding the line but also wearing them down with gun shells. 3 complete divisions then launch the counteroffensive. 1. The cavalry. While the 82nd Airborne guards the northern flank, the 3rd Infantry and 1st Armored advance toward Norfolk. HIMARS assaults NATO's rear line, Apaches clear the remaining area in the center, and Marines dig in across the south. This is the largest tank battle to take place on American soil in over a century. German Leopard 2 tanks and French Leclercs engage in fierce combat. There is no more air support, lines are blocked, and there is nowhere left to run when British paratroopers attempt to push back to the sea. The beachhead of NATO collapses, Florida falls. The northward push comes to an end and returns to Canada. Numerous NATO soldiers are apprehended and trapped. Some of them surrender on live television while at sea. A group of drones stops the Charles de Gaulle and a direct rocket strikes the HMS Prince of Wales. With the final NATO ships sailing away and U.S. submarines pursuing them across the Atlantic, the outcome of the war is obvious. In the race, the United States is clearly ahead. Due to their over-reliance on American technology, supply line failures, tardiness, and geography, NATO's invasion failed. Would they have prevailed? Perhaps, but only if in less than a week they had captured a port, halted U.S. air power, and compelled a surrender. Rather, they lost the war's nerve and the fleet. Imagine now that some of the greatest armies in history were attacking a contemporary U.S. base instead of NATO. You can see it now on your screen.